Okay, yeah, so I'm turning 38 this year, and it is so wild to see just how much capitalism has ruined over the course of my life.
Let's see what's going viral on TikTok, that lovely, lovely place with all those kind-hearted and generous and warm-hearted people and all the soundest, most logical political ideas. Let's see what's going on over there. So I came across this long rant about capitalism from an anti-capitalist Marxist perspective that was going semi-viral on there, getting hundreds of thousands of views and tens of thousands of likes. And I wanted to play it for you guys and discuss it with you because it's one of the most, frustrating things I've listened to in a long time. But it also, I think, spotlights something I want to discuss, a broader trend and phenomenon in online discourse that I want to pick apart because I really, really don't like it. Let's take a listen to the first bit.
Okay, yeah, so I'm turning 38 this year, and it is so wild to see just how much capitalism has ruined over the course of my life. Like, just memories I have from when I was younger versus now, I'm like, oh, that got worse. Oh, yeah, we're watching it get worse. We are like the lobsters in the pot being slowly boiled alive, you know what I mean? So without further ado, here are some things that I have noticed changing so much over my life for the worse. Okay, number one is the biggest one, and this is going to be something that's so obvious. It's the cost of housing. When I was 24, a studio apartment in Los Angeles where I live was $600 to $800 a month. Now, the same studio apartment in Los Angeles, where I still live, would be probably $1,200 to $1,600 a month. Literally double.
So first of all, anytime you're about to engage in political or policy analysis, but your source is how you remember things used to be in the good old days, years and years ago, you should probably check that because the human memory is not exactly pristine and unbiased and 100% accurate in how it perceives things over time. There's also no guarantee that your personal experiences are actually representative of what life was broadly like at that time. There's always outliers and there's always averages that differ from any one person's experience. But more importantly, I knew this video was going to make me pull my hair out the moment she cited housing markets as an example of capitalism failing in Los Angeles. For folks that don't understand, in the United States, we have a mixed economy, right? A mix of government intervention and regulation and market-based systems and private business and enterprise with large government programs and government spending. So on the scale of capitalism to socialism, it's somewhere in the middle, maybe slightly closer towards capitalism than socialism. Some sectors, like electronics is actually a really good example, are still pretty much free markets, largely free. And then some sectors are regulated and subsidized to death, as well as directly supplanted by government programs or offering of the services in question, to the point where they're barely capitalist at all. Housing is about as perfect an example of that as you can imagine. In a free competitive market, you have supply and demand working in tandem with people buying housing however they would like to buy it, and then people building new houses and selling them to the people who want homes. But in the modern housing market in many urban areas, especially places like LA, governments, through zoning, through regulation, through onerous permitting processes, through rent control, through all these other interventionist policies, have thoroughly limited, have strangled the supply of housing. So what you then have is lots of demand to live in an area, but no increase in supply to meet that demand. So you have a ton of people who want to live somewhere in a limited supply of housing. Naturally, like any Econ 101 textbook would tell you, that leads to unreasonably high prices and a shortage of housing for the people that need it. But that's not in any way an outgrowth of capitalism or free markets. If anything, it's literally an indictment of the regulation and strangulation of free markets. So as soon as I saw Miss TikTok socialist over here cite housing as the primary example of how capitalism has failed us over her lifetime, I knew this video was going to be light on facts, heavy on emotion, and ultimately propagandistic in its level of inaccuracy and misunderstanding. Her next complaint was perhaps less illogical, but a little stranger, if you ask me.
Kind of going along with that, number two, when I was younger, there used to be just like a lot more different types of stores. This is a really weird thing to explain, but like growing up in my town, there were a lot of different department stores. And you're probably like, what's even a department store? Literally the only one I can think of that still exists in a major way is like Macy's. When I was growing up, you would have Macy's, sure. You would also have like Sears. You would have Montgomery Ward. You would have Marshall Field. You would have Mervyn's. And then sometimes you'd go to like a different town, like a richer town maybe, and they would have like Bloomingdale's, Saks Fifth Avenue, Barney Co-op, Neiman Marcus, which a lot of those ones still do exist, again, because I think that once you reach like a higher level of income, you're less affected by these things. But it's the idea that we used to have so much choice, and those stores would all carry different things. They'd carry different small independent brands. You'd see smaller kind of companies at these major chain department stores. And that just doesn't exist anymore. Like somewhere in the mid 2000s, maybe after the Great Recession, companies just started buying each other up, and we saw this like monopolization of retail in particular, but of a lot of industries. So we just now as consumers have fewer and fewer options, which is weird because capitalism is supposed to tell us we have more options. We don't.
So in the era of e-commerce and Amazon Prime, I just genuinely struggle to even fathom how anybody could think that consumers have fewer options today than they did 20, 25 years ago. She's not wrong that there are like fewer brick and mortar store options, right? And that's because a lot of these department stores have gone out of business, though there are still some in any mall you go to, but maybe those will go away too. That doesn't mean that consumers have fewer options. If anything, the options that you can find on Amazon or Walmart.com or any of these massive e-commerce platforms are more expansive and varied and creative and different and just a huge catalog of things that not even the biggest, most expansive and sprawling department store in history 20 years ago, anywhere in the country would have had even a fraction of the options that we now all have and can get delivered to our house in just a matter of days. So it's just weird to be obsessed about this brick and mortar phenomenon and yet somehow blame that on capitalism. Yes, it is an outgrowth of markets evolving, but that's actually a good thing, and it's actually resulted in more choice and more options. I mean, think about a brick and mortar bookstore like a Barnes and Nobles that you used to have. You used to be able to go in and look, and there'd be a pretty wide variation and variety of books that you could buy. But now think about what happens when you go to Amazon.com/books and the amount of options that you have. Can anybody seriously argue that you had more options in the brick and mortar store? Now do the same thing for Macy's and Amazon or ASOS or any of these online options. Like nobody can seriously argue that there's fewer options in this era of e-commerce. You just can't. It's not true. But emotionally, it plays into nostalgia or something. So that makes it perfect for anti-capitalist TikTok, which increasingly prioritizes emotion over actual facts or argumentation. This video was quite long and contained a number of other topics, but I'm just going to play one more excerpt from it that I found particularly bizarre.
Cars are huge. They are so huge. Why are they so big? They're so big that when I'm driving, I can't even see around them to enter traffic without a stop sign or a stoplight. It's dangerous. The streets were not made for how giant our cars have become. And especially trucks. Pickup trucks are so huge now. I don't understand what people are doing with the pickup trucks. The pickup truck has become a status symbol. They're massive and it's dangerous. And these giant cars are more likely to kill people upon impact if you get into an accident. It's harrowing. Very, very weird. I am very horrified to see what new trends will happen over the next 10 years that will be attributed to capitalism. Like, how bad will the monopolization get? How high will the essentials for cost of living get? And because of that, like, how low will consumer spending get in non-essential kind of economic sectors? How giant will the cars become? Will cars get so big they eventually just become buses and multiple people can ride in them and we accidentally reinvent public transportation? Because I can get on board with that. But I swear to God, if I get murdered by a Dodge Ram, like on the street in front of my house, I'm going to be so pissed. I mean, I guess it won't be anything. I'll be dead. But then, hey, good news. I'll be able to stop worrying about all this shit, I guess.
So here's my thing. Maybe you wish cars weren't as big as they were, right? But like, if you are making your manifesto, your case against capitalism, and your fifth main critique, right? Not your 50th, not your 100th, but your fifth main critique is that cars these days are too big. You might be stretching there a little bit, babe. You might be pulling some mental gymnastics worthy of an Olympic gold. Cars are bigger because that's what people want. It's what they demand, and so the market meets that. If people didn't want bigger cars, they wouldn't be making them and selling them. So I personally have no problem with it whatsoever. I don't see it as any sort of systemic shortcoming of capitalism. But I do find it curious and funny that this is apparently a priority for this person. And it's weird to see her kind of making this like a safety thing, because in actuality, Bigger cars, larger cars, or SUVs are, generally speaking, safer than smaller cars. You're more likely to be okay if you get in an accident and you're in an SUV than if you're in a tiny little sedan. Capitalism is also working on innovating and bringing us self-driving, AI-powered cars that could eventually drastically reduce or even entirely eliminate traffic deaths. So, if you ask me, these trends and developments she's all up in arms about when it comes to cars, just because they might not be in line with her personal aesthetic or preferences, doesn't actually mean they're a bad thing or a real indictment of an economic system. But what do you guys think? Let me know what your thoughts are on that anti-capitalist TikTok and that general genre of commentary. Because I see a broader issue with this. This trend I see online, on Twitter all the time, oh my God, on Twitter, but also on TikTok, on Instagram, and other things, of people basically just complaining about anything in society or the world that they don't like and saying, capitalism, totally regardless of whether it's actually an outgrowth or an end product of free markets. Which, to be clear, I don't think any system is perfect. I don't think every outcome under capitalism is amazing and rosy and wonderful all the time. Although I think it's almost always better than the alternative. But it's just annoying, and it actually discredits any legitimate criticisms they might have when they call everything capitalism. Everything they don't like is capitalism. I literally saw someone on Twitter blame capitalism for the shoplifting epidemic. And I'm like, babe, that's the opposite of capitalism. Like, literally, capitalism is private property rights being upheld and respected in voluntary exchange, not people stealing and violating other people's property, while woke, local, progressive governments don't enforce shoplifting laws. So I found this video emblematic of this broader trend that I find really tiresome, just people calling everything capitalism. And they did this with racism too, right? They called everything under the sun racist. They bandied this term about like candy on Halloween, and unfortunately it lost its meaning, it lost its weight, and now actual racism that should be called out, when they raise an alarm about it, everyone looks at them like the boy who cried wolf. You're doing the same thing with your annoying overuse of capitalism, guys. You really are. All right, well, that's it for today's topic. So let me know in the comments what you thought. And if you're watching us on YouTube, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, yada, yada, yada.